All right, so we are coming a little bit full circle from where we started with Dr. Calicia's talk, where she talked about clinical trials, and we now have Blair Adams from the Clinical Trials Office, who's going to give us a little bit more information of exactly what a clinical trial is, how one can benefit from the clinical trial themselves, but also for our society in general. So really excited to have you here to give us this talk. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for having me here today. My name is Blair Adams. I'm the Assistant Director of Clinical Operations for the Clinical Trials Office here at Lineberger. So typically, we want to talk first about what clinical trials are. They are research studies that involve human volunteers. These studies can be observational or interventional in nature. So what that means is patients can be receiving therapy for their cancer diagnosis on these trials. They can be part of a cancer registry. They can be part of screening initiatives. They can be answering questionnaires or be a part of quality and life improvement studies, so on and so forth. So all of this research is really important into improving cancer outcomes. I know earlier you heard a lot about different clinical trials that have improved care thus far in the melanoma spectrum. I do want to highlight the first known clinical trial in the modern era. So Dr. Lind was a physician on a British naval ship in 1747 who started observing scurvy symptoms in sailors that had been at sea for quite some time. And so what he did in that observation was to divide these sailors into multiple groups. He administered different interventions, some of which were giving them cider, some were having them ingest seawater, but the most beneficial outcome was observed in those patients or sailors that were intaking lemons and oranges and other citrus fruits. And so what that showed him was that these patients were resolving their scurvy symptoms through this ingestion, and that led to the knowledge of how to treat and prevent scurvy. So while that is an easy example, it really highlights the importance of what clinical trials can show us to improve care. So like I said with Dr. Lind's example, the importance of clinical trials is to help provide better ways to prevent, diagnose, treat, or manage cancer and its associated symptoms. This improved knowledge can really help us know more about cancer and its associated care. And we found that outcomes for patients that are diagnosed with cancer have improved through the improvements with clinical trials, and we are seeing patients that are living longer as the result of previous trials. Many of the treatments that are approved today in the standard of care setting were once tested in a clinical trial, and the FDA does require that new drugs are first tested in clinical trials prior to seeking approval. So why participate in a clinical trial? Clinical trials enable patients to gain access to new therapies before they're widely available to the general public. This is based on the most up-to-date research at the time. And so what this enables patients to do is receive that early care. It does take quite some time, sometimes decades, from discovery of a new drug to the approval through the FDA. So this is a really great time to capitalize on that treatment if it's available through a clinical trial. Additionally, when patients are enrolled on clinical trials, they do receive very close medical care from a team of experts. This includes their treating physician, the research team, nurses, pharmacists, etc. And so there's a lot of careful and frequent monitoring that patients may not receive in standard of care just because of the monitoring that's required by clinical trials. Additionally, this is a great way to help others by contributing to the future of medical research to add to the overall knowledge and improved care outcomes. So how do you find a clinical trial? So the first and best way to do this is to ask your doctor. If you are receiving your care for your cancer, your loved one or your family or friend is, you can simply ask your doctor. They're likely aware of what is currently available, either here at UNC or across the state. Another great way to do this is to search online at clinicaltrials.gov. You're able to search by cancer diagnosis, what stage you may be, and things like that, see what's open at our center, but across the country. Additionally, we've put a lot of effort into, over the last few years, advertising what is available here at Lineberger. And so you are able to navigate to our Lineberger website. This Find a Clinical Trial snippet here will show you what button you would need to click on. You're able to search through Research for Me what is available currently and is open at our institution. You can also email our cancer clinical trials email inbox and just say what's going on, what you need, and we can help with our research teams further guide you to what trials we have available. Additionally, we have these Research for Me QR codes. They are a great way to directly link to the Research for Me website. They are widely available in our clinic patient rooms at the cancer hospital. They are also on everybody's after visit summary when they are seeking care at UNC Health. So no matter if you're getting your cancer care or you're going to your primary care provider, I know this specifically because I see it on my son's AVSs and my own when we're seeking our general care. So it's a great opportunity to take a look at that, whether you get a printed version or you are accessing this through your MyChart. So what happens after you are a patient and you've been approached for a clinical trial opportunity? First off, your treating physician and the research team may talk to you about what this trial means in the context of your general care, weighing the standard of care options, if there are any, versus the clinical trial. This is a great opportunity to learn from this team of experts early what the trial involves, ask about side effects, any questions you may have, understand your responsibility as a patient as well, and ultimately make a decision. If you do decide to join the clinical trial, you would give your informed consent at that initial period, and then screening activities would begin to assess your individual eligibility for the trial. If after all of that, the team is able to review the eligibility criteria and determine if you are eligible for the trial, you would then be enrolled to the trial and the treatment would begin. So during the trial, there are regular check-ins specified by that individual clinical study to check in, test your health, see how things are going, monitor you for how the treatment is working, but also keep an eye on side effects and things that may be impacting your continued ability to receive that treatment. These things can look like labs, biopsies, specific biomarkers, and samples taken for the research team to analyze later, visits with your provider, with the research team, scans, biopsies, questionnaires, and things like that. And then after your treatment ends, whether you complete the treatment as it's intended by the clinical trial, maybe your disease has not been responding to the therapy and you need to seek other treatment options, you would come off treatment, but there are routine follow-up periods in most clinical trials that patients are able to continue to be followed by the research team and their provider after the treatment ends. After the trial, these results can really help doctors and researchers evaluate the safety and effectiveness of these interventions, and the goal overall is to improve care for future patients. And so, like I said, the goal is to submit successful interventions to the FDA for approval, but we can't do any of this unless patients are enrolled to these clinical trials and we're able to analyze the outcomes. Next, I'd like to talk about safety and ethics with regards to clinical trials. So what are your rights if you're participating on a clinical trial? These clinical trials are voluntary, and this cannot be stressed enough. If you are enrolled in a clinical trial, you can change your mind at any time. It's really important that you talk to your physician about that decision so they can guide next steps and see what your care may look like. But that is really important that you know throughout the entire course of the study that that is a voluntary nature. And I will also state that informed consent is not a one-time process when you first sign up for the trial. It's an ongoing process. And so what happens is oftentimes there are new risk notifications or benefits or things that change about the trial over the course of the time, and the research team is obligated to share that with participants as soon as possible so that patients can make an informed decision about their continued participation on the clinical trial. In terms of safety measures, trials do follow strict guidelines to keep participants safe. There are ethics committees that do review each study to protect the patients enrolled in the trial. This happens both at the initiation of the trial at the local site, but also at routine annual review. There's also checkpoints built into trials that the sponsors will evaluate the data that's been generated thus far to continue, see if the trial is worth continuing, evaluate the safety, and then continue proceeding if that is the direction they choose to go in. Oftentimes also there is routine study monitoring at the site level. Sponsors will send in their representatives to monitor at routine intervals to ensure that the site is doing everything according to the outlined protocol, review the data that's been entered, issue queries, make sure everything looks clean for submission. Patient information is kept confidential, and that's an important aspect of participating in clinical trials. Sometimes people think that they'll be identified in any type of publication that goes out after the trial ends, and that is not the case. Each patient is protected by a random number that is assigned to them, so that when data is pushed forward to the sponsors and other agencies, that they are not singly identified. Additionally, each new treatment does undergo several phases in its investigation to ensure that it is appropriate for submission to the FDA. So typically, these look like phase 1 through 3 trials. You may have heard those terms before. Phase 1 trials are really aimed at investigating the drug in a smaller subset of the population, making sure that it's safe, what's the most appropriate route of administration, and what is the best way to give, as well as determining what the initial dose is going to be set at. So typically, this can enroll between 15 to 50 patients. Like I said, it's a much smaller group. Depending on the success of that agent in that particular trial, it can go on to the phase 2 portion. So this is really looking at, is this effective in treating the cancer diagnosis that it's intended? What are the side effects? This is a larger group, although it is not nearly as large as the phase 3 portion of the trial. So the phase 3 portions can enroll hundreds of subjects. It compares how their new treatment oftentimes works in comparison with the standard of care therapy that's currently on the market. And like I said, enrolls a much larger group. All right, so common questions, things that we hear a lot at our site. Who can participate in clinical trials? So not all clinical trials can enroll every patient that has that specific diagnosis. They're not created for everyone, but they are created to answer an important question. And so the eligibility criteria is unique to each individual study. And so it's really important that patients understand this when they are being approached for trials, that even if they are screened for trials, they may not be eligible to enroll. Additionally, patients from all backgrounds are encouraged and needed to participate on clinical trials to create better treatment and outcomes for the future population. So what we don't want is only certain groups of individuals enrolling on these trials, and that specific indication and approval is only relevant to a certain group of people. So for example, all ages, all races, all sexes are really important to enroll on clinical trials so that we have a very wide scope of what these treatments can be applied to in the future. Will I get the treatment? So some patients do get the new treatment, while others may receive the current standard of care therapy on the trial. Typically, like I said, this is in those phase 3 portions of trials. Randomization occurs, so what that means is a computer typically will randomly assign, like a flip of a coin, a patient to either the intervention or the standard of care treatment. But what I will note is in those specific situations, it is not uncommon for sponsors to allow, if a patient's disease has progressed on the standard of care treatment, sometimes patients are able to roll over and receive that interventional treatment as well. Another big question we get are, am I going to get a placebo? Placebos are rare in cancer clinical trials, and if given, they're often paired with a standard of treatment. So you will receive treatment, it might just look different than receiving the specific intervention of the trial. And what are the risks? Side effects are possible with any treatment. There is a potential risk that could be occurred to the patient. Those side effects are oftentimes outlined in that informed consent conversation before a patient joins the trial. There's also the risk that the new treatment may or may not work. We as clinical trial teams are very clear and upfront about that with our participants. During the informed consent process, the goal of the research is to find out if it does or doesn't. And lastly, will it cost me anything? This is another big question and concern for patients. So there are research costs that are associated specifically with the trial. Sometimes that means the interventional agent itself. Sometimes it's specific tests that the sponsor has indicated are needed to research the particular drug. And oftentimes those charges will go to the sponsor. In terms of insurance and patient coverage, typically things that are part of your normal routine cancer oncology care would go to your insurance. And so that's all decided at the level before the trial even starts at the site. And then some trials, this is really great, do offer reimbursement for travel and lodging. And so when your consent conversation is happening, that is something that your study coordinator and team would talk to you about so you could determine the best ways to go about doing that. All right, so after the trial completely ends, I'm not talking just for the patient, but overall, what happens? So the data will be analyzed. The researchers will review the data upon study completion to determine if it met their primary and secondary aims. The research results will be published following this review on websites like clinicaltrials.gov, in medical journals, and other sources online. And then at the site level, the research team does have the intention to share those results with individual participants, and that is definitely something that we really strive to do. Whether the results were positive or not, that's something that's important to share back with that person that gave their time to the research. And then, like I've said before, the goal is to submit for FDA review and approval. So if the trial has been successful and the sponsor elects to submit for a new drug application, they will submit these results to the FDA, and the goal is to have more and better treatment options for patients down the road. So in closing, patients are such an important aspect of the clinical trials work we do here at Lineberger and also across the world. We could not do our research without all of your involvement, so I wanted to thank you for that. We've heard some really good resources earlier today, the Medication Assistance Program, the SECU House, what our wonderful social workers can do. I also wanted to highlight some other additional resources as well. So there's a great comprehensive cancer support program here at Lineberger for patients and families. It's located in the cancer hospital. We have clinical trial patient navigators through the CREATE initiative. Patient Financial Services is a wonderful resource. And then, like I said earlier, we have our cancer clinical trials email box that anyone can send an email to, and somebody will get back to you shortly. I wanted to thank everyone for being here today. We're all here for a reason, and it's all specific to you. So you may be here to support your loved ones, hear more about the cancer that's impacting you and what advancements have been made, here to support others on their cancer journey, find better ways to treat, predict, and care for patients with cancer. I wanted to share personally that a few years ago, my father passed away from metastatic pancreatic cancer. And while that was a very sad moment for myself and my family, it does drive the work that I continue to do here at Lineberger so that eventually, hopefully down the road, families and patients don't have to go through what my family personally experienced. So thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you listening to my presentation. Okay.
Stage 4 at the time, in 08, they said. I am still here.
Mm-hmm.
However, when I got a call 6 years later, in 18, they said, I did get the real thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the only one left that got the real thing. I don't know about the others, but I never saw any kind of report of what happened.
Okay.
Except I know I'm a real survivor, and I'm glad.
Yeah, well, we're so thankful for your participation on the trial, and I'm so sorry that you haven't heard. Yeah.
I think I'm a walking miracle, but I don't know why.
Well, I'd be happy to give you my email address and
Yeah, if
personally
you could tell
connect.
me, I know who did the trial,
Uh-huh.
who sponsored the trial.
Okay.
Trial with their drugs. However, after 6 years.
Yeah.
Something else happened, I couldn't be on their drugs anymore, but I'm
Gotcha.
on somebody else's for the last 6 more years.
All right, well, I'd be happy to give you my email address so we can connect. Yeah.
If anybody wants a recommendation, if they can get in it, do a clinical trial.
Thank
because
you.
it just might save your life, because it saves mine.
Yes.
I have a question. Can you define, just for everyone, what a sponsor is and what
Sure.
a sponsor responsibility is?
Sure.
And how they collaborate with actually
Yeah.
your primary oncologist, how that works? Because I know a lot of oncologists say, well, there is this clinical
Mhm.
trial. I'm really not involved in it, don't know a lot about it.
Yeah.
How does that collaboration take place?
Sure, that's a great question. So when I talk about sponsors for clinical trials, we're thinking of our pharmaceutical companies. Lineberger itself also is a sponsor of clinical trials, so we have our own investigator-initiated trials where we are both the sponsor and the investigator. But when we're thinking typically about sponsors, it's your pharmaceutical companies, so like Merck, Genentech, places like that. And so typically they will develop a protocol concept. They have research teams that are dedicated specifically to liaisoning with clinical trial sites to assess if that is a trial that they would be interested in opening, and there's a lot that goes into it. So are there competing trials? Does the site have the resources to conduct that trial and things like that? So there's a lot of early conversations with the investigators at the site, with the clinical trial staff to see if that's a trial that they would be willing to support and bring on. And so there's a lot of those conversations in the background. Sometimes when you say a provider doesn't know about a trial, it may be because we haven't opened it for a variety of resources, whether it's competing studies, that we don't have that population here at UNC and things like that. But that's typically what that process will look like. And then if a trial is accepted, we would start activating at the site, and that can take some time because there's a lot of budgetary things that we need to look at, and there's a lot of work that goes into implementing a clinical trial. Yeah, I hope, did that answer your question?
It did, yes.
Okay. Any other questions?
Just one thing to add, if you visit melanoma.org, we have a clinical trial finder where you can put in, where you live, specifically related to your disease, and it'll help you find a clinical trial that matches your criteria, because there are exclusion criteria. So even if you see a clinical trial, it might not be applicable to you based on some of that exclusion criteria. We also have a service called Ask a Nurse. We have a full-time oncology nurse on staff that you can email at any time, askanurse@melanoma.org, and she will also help point you in the right direction if you're looking for a clinical trial.
I just know my doctors and my surgeon, my physician, I think they all work to get me into the trial. I'm grateful.
Well, we're grateful for you participating.
It worked. And the nurses. All of them.
All right. Well, thank you so much.